Hey, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Scene podcast from Skyloom. In this interview, I'm sitting down with my friend Steven Scharf. He's a real estate and architectural photographer in California. We're going to be talking about his workflow and kind of what software tools he uses. We're going to talk about lighting. We're going to talk about the post-processing workflow pipeline, the whole 9 yards. At the end of this interview, hopefully, you'll get a really clear understanding of how a working real life photographer is using tools to get the job done. That's coming your way next. Hey, welcome back to Behind the Scene. Today I get to sit down with my friend Steven Scharf. Like I said, he is that architectural and real estate photographer that everybody wants to be. Hey, Steven, welcome to the show, man. How's it going?
Fine. Thank you for having me on your show today.
Yeah, no, this is going to be good. Thank you for coming on.
Sure.
There's a lot to talk about. You and I were just sort of chit-chatting in the green room about just the art of architectural photography and real estate photography. We're going to start the interview there and kind of talk about the distinction between the two. But before we do that, tell us who Steven Scharf is. Who is Steven Scharf, and why are you here today on the show, Steven?
So I'm a retired professional scientist. I spent the majority of my career working as a molecular biologist here in the Bay Area in the biotech industry. And I retired at the end of 2017 and have been a photographer all of my life. And so I started doing commercial real estate and architectural photography in 2018. And I also do some credentialed motorsports photojournalist photography for the local racetrack nearby, Sonoma Raceway.
Love it. Love it. So suffice it to say, you know your way around a camera or two and you understand light and all that stuff. More so than I do, as demonstrated on a lot of your work, which is, by the way, as meticulous as people will see as we kind of go through this interview. So let's talk about the distinction between real estate photography and architectural photography. It kind of feels like they're two sides of the same coin. You know, give us from the frontline trenches. How do you guys that are actually working in this field, how do you draw the distinction between the two?
The two I would say, an overlapping set of requirements for the types of photography we do, but they also have distinct requirements as well. So many of the lighting techniques that we would use in architectural or real estate may be common and overlapping, but the types of scenes that we would show, the way that we might edit the photograph, the amount of time certainly that we would spend in architectural photography would be deeper and more involved than real estate. Simply because you're showing generally commercial property. There are people working there. It's a place of business. And you want to show, the business in terms of what it provides to its customers or clientele, how folks work in the space, how the space is designed to support the work of the folks that work there. Whereas with real estate, really, showing somebody's home and showing both the best parts of the home and the home at its best, so that, an agent can make a sale. Certainly, we have a lot of that. Sorry, so we have a lot of homes for sale here in the Bay Area, obviously, as you know. So there's a lot of work to go around.
Yeah, which is interesting, and I was telling you before, it seems like these kinds of interviews that I do that are focused on architectural and real estate photography seem to be some of the best performing interviews that I do. I don't know if it's because of and I don't want to say it's a low barrier to entry, but having, let's call it, readily accessible subjects to shoot, where you can practice on your own home, your neighbor's home, or a building around the corner that you find interesting. You can take photos of those and kind of hone your craft before you hang out the shingle. Can we talk about that just a little bit before we dive into the work? Just the shingle part of it and just the business model for the real estate and architectural photographer. Is it as simple as just getting on the phone and calling up your local agents or agency real estate, and saying, hey, I do this kind of work, hire me? Or is it deeper than that?
No, it's deeper than that. Obviously, you have to be effective at marketing, and I think you've had, I think, some guests on about how to do that effectively. The six figures folks that you've interviewed in
Hmm.
the past, I believe,
Hmm.
I think have some
Jeffrey
really good
Totaro.
techniques.
Yeah,
Jeffrey
Jeffrey.
Totaro that you
Yeah.
interviewed back in 2018. I remember that interview with Jeffrey. He kind of talks about the importance of that. Now, Jeffrey had an advantage in that he was trained as an architect first, right? And so he had, a base of contacts. But any effective commercial photography is going to be, as you know, Frederick, at least 90% marketing and 10% photography, or maybe 5% photography and 5% production. But the marketing is a key piece of that, right? Establishing contacts. There's lots of other guests I'm sure that you have had on that talk about that. Seth Godin has some really good techniques in his books about how to kind of establish yourself
Yeah.
professionally in a commercial space. So his work is really a good resource for folks getting started. But yeah, there's no substitute for doing the marketing that you need to kind of get yourself known. And then as we'll talk about today, there's no substitute for the quality of the work that you deliver to meet your customers' requirements and needs.
Yeah. No, I love that. And is it, from your perspective, is it a path of ascension from the real estate photography to ultimately, one day become the architectural photographer with the big fat kind of invoice that goes out? Or are these just two separate kind of worlds, and you can enjoy yourself and be dominant in real estate photography, or you can just decide that you want to move to the other one and be dominant in that area? Where do you fall on that?
I think it really depends on the individual photographer. Some folks are going to be perfectly happy doing real estate work because, for the most part, the turnaround times are quick. The shooting is simpler. The setup and the production of the shoot, right, in terms of the amount of assistance or lighting equipment you might need for a home, is much simpler than an architectural or commercial space. So you may not need an assistant or two like you might need for an architectural shoot. I don't know too many real estate photographers that straddle that do a lot in both areas personally. I think generally a lot of real estate guys I know are primarily focused on real estate, but also something called designer shoots, where you might have a model home or a new series of homes that are opening up, and the developer needs a designer to come in and stage those homes to kind of show potential buyers what those homes might be like, and you need a good photographer to do what are called designer shoots. And that's kind of straddles the area between, just strictly what we think of as real estate photography and what might be more formal architectural photography of the type that Jeff Totaro does.
Yeah, yeah. It's so fascinating. That's one of the things I love about photography, because all these different genres and techniques, and you're always learning, right? I mean, this is each genre is vast and deep, and you can get into it and just explore a whole new world with the camera and the software that you've been using for this other genre. So very interesting stuff. So let's talk about the flow, right? We talked a
Mhm.
little bit about the marketing. When you're on site, what does your loadout look like? From a camera standpoint, from
Mhm.
a lighting standpoint, what are you bringing with you to the site?
So the simplest example would be to give for a real estate shoot, and
Mhm.
that's probably the bulk of the stuff that I've done, certainly, or that my friends that I know that are that work in this area as well. So one of the key things, obviously, we do everything on a tripod, and a really good stable tripod with a good properly performing head on it is critical. The reason for that is that we will usually shoot multiple frames of a given view of a room or a space, and then blend those frames together. So we will typically shoot a number of ambient frames, one or two ambient frames, and the number of flash frames as well, to light the room evenly and consistently. And so in order to do that, we basically have to create a lockdown set, in the sense that we need a good stable tripod, and we need a good head that will not move at all between successive frames, because we're going to be working with a stack of layers to composite those frames to get the final lighting we want for the photograph. Um, Most photographers, with respect to lighting, use speed lights. You can do a lot with just a couple of speed lights, 2 or 3. You usually don't need more than 2, but sometimes you might need 3. And speed lights generally have enough power to light a room. Certainly, you only need one for a bedroom, but for a living room or a kitchen, you might use 1 or 2. On some occasions, you might need, like Frederick, the new Godox AD200s that you just got, you might use a light like that for
Yeah.
a tall entranceway where there's like the entranceway goes up a number of floors, and you want to kind of get the light up to the top and then have it come down and light the entranceway. So you might need a little bit more power for that. And then for architectural, given that you're typically shooting larger spaces, you might need bigger lights, lights that put out more power that will cover more area, and you might be moving them around more than you would, say, for a real estate shot. And we can kind of talk about how we light for real estate. But in terms of the basic equipment, a good stable tripod, pretty much any camera nowadays will produce file sizes that are appropriate for real estate, because you're just going into the MLS. And so I think the typical requirements are you need an image 1500 pixels wide, so anything from micro four thirds to APS-C to full frame is more than adequate for producing image quality that's appropriate for real estate. A lot of guys that shoot architectural will typically shoot a full frame or medium format, simply to produce the file sizes that they need for those larger spaces and for that type of clientele, but not necessarily. Again, it depends a lot on the space that you're shooting and who the client is. I don't know that you would need, for example, medium format to shoot a restaurant, for a restaurant client, but you might for, really large office space where you need large file sizes and things to show the space. At its best.
And it depends on the final output as well. Like you said, if it's for a listing in the MLS, that's a certain resolution. But if the final destination is either A, unknown, or B, it's going to go into a ritzy magazine for $1 million homes, then you want the pixels to demonstrate that, right?
Exactly. Like, for example, Jeff talked about this in his interview with you. A lot of his clientele are architects that are submitting photographs to architectural competitions, right? And so there you're going to want maximal image quality because it's going to be viewed in a very formal setting, and you need probably as much image quality as you can obtain for these situations where the architect is submitting his work into competition. And so I could see the need for, shooting medium format in those situations as well. And then the other thing, just the last piece of equipment, most real estate photographers, architectural photographers use a geared head. You don't have to use a geared head to do it effectively, but most of my friends do use a geared head and like working that way because it gives you the precision, when you're taking something, what we call a 1-point photograph, straight on shot, and you're showing 3 walls, and then you're stacking frames on top of that as you light the scene. The geared head gives you a bit more precision in terms of setting up the photograph and also reproducibility between frames than a ball head might. So that's the last kind of piece of equipment I would say that most real estate or architectural photographers use.
Love it. Yeah, and that's a really good point about the resolution and how, like, when I think architectural photography or even real estate photography, I for some reason my brain automatically goes to medium format. It's like, oh, you got to have more pixels, and I have full frame camera, but I'm primarily a micro four thirds guy, and so I'm like, is that world shut off to me? And apparently not, right? Yeah.
No, there's lots of real estate photographers that are working with micro four thirds cameras, APS-C, full frame. Sometimes when we get kind of into more details about how we actually shoot, but there are occasions where a real estate photographer might need what's called a perspective control lens or a tilt shift lens. And those lenses aren't available in all lines of cameras by different brands, right? So Canon makes, for example, really good tilt shift lenses, and you might need that. Certainly you would need that more frequently in an architectural situation, less so in real estate. But my buddy Peter Lyons sometimes uses a tilt shift lens for certain real estate shoots. Not all that often, but maybe 5-10% of the time. So
Yeah, yeah. And you can add that kind of stuff to your loadout, when you get to that level of
yeah,
where you need it, right? You don't need to start by investing tens of thousands of
no.
dollars into that stuff, and then, yeah. So the last question on just sort of the photography side of it is
Mhm.
externals and exterior. Um, and I want to frame this in HDR. Right.
Mhm.
So a lot of people, when you say the acronym HDR, they automatically think of, dogs playing pool on velvet, that kind of crunchy, oversaturated look. But that's not necessarily what HDR is designed for. Can you explain how the professional real estate and architectural photographer leverages the HDR technique, or high dynamic range?
I would say that they leveraged it about 10 or 15 years ago, but most of them have moved on from that at this point. I think that when I believe it was Photomatics that probably what came out about 10 or 15 years ago, 12
Yeah.
years ago,
Yep.
something like that. I think there was a lot of excitement about HDR when Photomatics came out because, again, as you know, professional photography is all about effectiveness and efficiency in your workflow, right? And so they thought that if they could, just use ambient light and, composite together via HDR, a number of frames that would give them the control over the range of lighting that they needed, that would save them time and thereby money and increase their profitability. But most of them that I know have moved on from that. And for exteriors, you almost never need to use an HDR setting. You shoot at the time of day where you have plenty of light. You shoot ambient. You don't shoot with lights outside because there's plenty of light. Uh, and um, and so HDR really doesn't have an application per se outside. It used to be more frequently used indoors for lighting interiors, but I would say, at least certainly the majority of guys that I know that are shooting now, with blending ambient frames and flash frames together so that the lighting looks natural and accurate and doesn't have color contamination, which we'll talk more about in a little bit.
Yeah.
And so what I will say, though, that folks are excited about is the new sky replacement features that came out in Luminar recently, and that works quite well for real estate situations, assuming that you have the library of clouds and skies that you need for the time of day and where the light is coming from, and you can obtain different libraries for that. But there has been pretty notable adoption of that feature. Because it saves folks time in production in having to do classic sky replacements in Photoshop.
Yeah, yeah, especially in an area like we live in, right? California,
Yeah.
where there's not a whole lot of cloud
Mhm.
cover, especially not dramatic, beautiful clouds, right? And now you don't really need that. You can put them in later.
Right.
Really cool. Let's talk about the post processing,
Hmm.
and just the workflow there. So you've got your raw files, you got your images, assuming you're shooting raw. So you got the raw
Hmm.
files, and what happens then? You're back at your workstation. What do you do?
So I would say before we get to that step, one of the key things that a real estate or commercial photographer is going to do is they're going to be shooting multiple frames of a scene of a room, whatever angle that they're going to be using for that room that shows the room at its best. They're going to be shooting typically a couple of ambient frames using ambient light, and then also lighting the room with flashes or strobes as well. And the reason for that is that in particular, real estate agents like really bright and cheery looking rooms, makes the room look more appealing. And so the room has got to be very evenly lit. And it can be difficult to do that in certain spaces without using flash, if not impossible. And so this again is the reason for where a geared head is really useful. But typically you're going to be using, I would say, a minimum of 2 frames to as many as maybe 6 or more frames that are a blend of both ambient light exposures and flash exposures that you will be bringing together in your workflow in post-production to produce the final photograph.
Okay, and you're doing that in what? Is that primarily a Photoshop app? I know you're in Capture One a lot as well. What do you use for that blending?
Yeah. So, for example, if I were working in Capture One, say for an architectural shoot, and I needed to use a luminosity mask just to kind of get the light where I needed it to be in a certain part of the room. I would do that in Capture One, and then I would bring those frames together in Photoshop. And in fact, you can export all your edits, say in either Lightroom or Capture One, out to Photoshop. So in Lightroom, it's easy for real estate because you can select your frames that you want to edit in Photoshop, and there's a command where you can just export and then open them as a stack in Photoshop. So for real estate, going from Lightroom to Photoshop for that, where you're blending ambient and flash together, is easy because you can just use a single command to do that. It will bring them into Photoshop as a stack. And then I have a little action I run that basically aligns the stack for me so that everything is in alignment. For Capture One, you can basically export those files out to a folder. And then there's a script you can run inside of Photoshop that will basically open those files, those flash and ambient frames or exposures, and then align them in a stack as well. So the workflow is slightly different, but it's in essence, it's effectively the same. So, you would basically do your culling in either in Lightroom or Capture One, depending on what your favorite is. Export those files either directly into Photoshop from Lightroom or to a folder from Capture One that you would then re-import into Photoshop for editing. And that would typically be your ambient frames and your flash frames together, and then you would blend those appropriately to get the lighting for the room. So, you might shoot a room with, say, typically we don't use modifiers, Frederick, and so we just shoot with bare strobes. But what we do is we use the walls and ceiling to bounce the light off and then soften it as it comes down into the room, right? So, for example, if you need to light the right side of a room, you might bounce the strobe off the left side wall and have it come across the room. And as it comes across the room, it diffuses out and softens, and then that will light the right side for you. And then you would just go over and bounce the flash off the other side of the room, say the right side, and have the light come across to the left. And then you would blend those two frames light throughout the room.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that. Yeah, so it sounds deceptively simple, but I know it's complex. It's like brain surgery. Yeah, you just cut here and move that, and it's sew it back up. It's all done. No, this is good stuff. So I want to see some of this the different shots you've done. Shall we bring up your screen?
Sure.
Okay.
So we can talk about some of the things that we look for, as well. So this is just an architectural scene that you see here in this frame. So this was an architectural shoot that I did back in 2019 for some friends of mine that have a professional photography studio. And for this scene here, I probably used 4 flash exposures and then probably 2 ambient exposures. So what you see is the light is very even in the room. And then you'll notice in the back rooms at the back of the studio, this is the front entranceway to the studio, you'll know that those rooms are lit well as well, right? And normally, if you just pop flash into this main entranceway of the studio here, those rooms are going to be dark. And so you couldn't see it, but in the actual individual frames that I used to light this, I'm standing inside the wall on the left room where you can't see me, popping the flash so that it lights up the left side of that space on the room on the left, and then doing the reverse of that on the room on the right where I'm standing inside the wall so you can't see me, popping the flash over and having the light come down so it lights up the right side of the room. And then I probably used, there's a window you can't see off to camera left. You see the big photograph on the left of the photograph there. There's a window that lights up this part of the room that gives me pretty good light. And then I probably used, a couple flash exposures for the main gallery here as well, and then just blended everything in Photoshop so that the lighting looks consistent and even throughout the room.
That's gorgeous. That's gorgeous. So explain a little bit on how you were able to, because this looks like it was just a great shot that was taken all at once, obviously, which is the goal.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But I see the lights, the spotlights, the lights that are on the ceiling,
Yes.
aimed at the artwork on the walls. Those are casting the appropriate sort of lighting there. How are you able to maintain that as well as a bare bulb, what I assume is a bare bulb or Fresnel exposure for the main lighting of the room?
Actually, most of the light in the room, Frederick, is actually ambient.
Oh,
So
okay.
the lighting that you see over each of the photographs along the side and back walls are Solux bulbs that the owners put in that are daylight balanced, so that the photograph looks proper when presented at a proper daylight color temperature.
Hmm.
And it's just a matter of masking, exposing it correctly so that you can blend it in and the lighting looks normal. Uh, so it's just part of the process I would normally do to kind of blend the lighting in with the frames, is just take an exposure that shows those lit correctly, and then blending them in just, how much opacity do you blend into each layer. But most of the light in this room was from ambient, and then I don't remember specifically, but I probably popped a couple flash shots at the back behind me to get the light to come forward to light the studio. And then I remember going into those back rooms, one by one, and popping flash in each room to get light in the back room so that everything looks like the way that your eye would normally see it if you walked into the studio.
But one of the things that I think is
Yeah.
striking to me as a photographer when I look at this is the lack of distortion in the shot. Right, the lines are straight. Your vertical lines are straight. Your horizontal lines are straight. It's very pleasing to the eye in terms of there's not a whole lot of distortion going on. Obviously, that's intentional, but how do
Mhm.
you do that without a tilt
Yeah.
shift, gear going on?
That's a very good question. I was just actually going to speak to that. So
Good,
thanks for the lead in. Um,
sure.
we use the lens correction tool a lot, a lot in this work. And so, the key thing is to get, again, this is why I geared head on a stable tripod. A tripod is important. But what I tried to do here was really get to the geometric center of the room, so that the optical axis of the lens was, as precisely positioned down the middle of the room as possible, so that the room is effectively as square as possible in terms of what it looks like. And then if there's any keystoning, Frederick, which is probably what you were alluding to with respect
Yep.
to your question, the lens correction tool in Photoshop will really let you fix a lot of that, as long as it's not too severe, right? Or if you're using, for example, a lens that may be too wide at the far end, where you kind of get a funhouse look, right? That's
Hmm.
the corrections will start to look wonky. But for this is called a 1 point shot or a single point shot. It's not too difficult at the height that I have the camera lens, and also the positioning the camera lens, for the lens correction tool in Photoshop to fix whatever little amount of keystoning or distortion there might be in this photograph. So lens correction tool is basically what I use here. It's just I have to be really careful and precise about where I place the camera lens and the optical axis of the lens, so I can try to get it as square in camera at the time that I make the exposures.
So when you're shooting this, you're shooting with the knowledge that you're gonna correct any distortions later in post. Does the perspective correction tool or lens correction tool within Lightroom or Photoshop, does that sort of obviate and replace the need for tilt shift lenses completely, or is there still room for those?
There's absolutely room for those. Typically, where I've seen folks use those is where they might have the camera a little bit lower, a lower perspective. This perspective is kind of, you know, meant to represent what you might see at eye level when you walk into the room, right? But sometimes when you're shooting either architectural spaces or real estate spaces, you're going to have the camera a little bit lower, like say shooting over countertops over a kitchen or something like that. And when the lens is lower and it's kind of looking up a bit more into the room, you're going to obviously have more keystoning going on. And so I've seen, my buddies that use tilt shift lenses use them in situations where they don't feel they'll be able to get a proper correction just using the lens correction filter in Photoshop, so that it looks, right, that it looks correct. But again, that's probably maybe at most 10% of the time. I would think probably, I don't do a lot of architectural work, but I would think that architectural photographers, depending on the size and the height of the space that they're using, would certainly be using them more if they're shooting, for example, up into an office space, right? And they want to show the second floor, and they don't want to get a lot of convergence, from keystoning, then they might use the lens in those situations as well. I would think.
I love it. I love it. This is great work. Great work. What else can we look at? I want to see more. I want to see more
Sure. I mean,
Stephen
I'm gonna
Scharf.
I'm going to just show some of the things that we kind of deal with here. So I'm going to stop sharing this and share my screen for. I'm just going to open up Capture One here real quick,
Yeah.
and we'll talk about a couple of things. So I'm going to go back to this just as an example. So just some of the things we were speaking about with respect to what do real estate agents look for, right? I kind of mentioned the fact that they want rooms to look, bright and cheerful. And this is a little bit of a contentious point with various photographers and real estate agents, and also kind of the school that you were trained in terms of real estate photography, right? So there's two very good photographer teachers, Cooper and Colangelo, that teach shooting real estate with lights out, with the interior lights turned out. And I have friends that prefer the lights to be out because the room looks cleaner, and I'll talk about why that is in just a moment. But most real estate agents want the lights on in the room, even in the middle of the daytime. And they feel that that gives a warmer, more cheerful appearance. And so again, depending on the requirements of the agent, you may be shooting in situations like we see here, where it's clearly, I think it's probably around noontime, it's bright outside, but you have the lights on inside. And this is a very common situation that many real estate photographers will encounter, and you kind of have to deal with that. So this photograph looks okay to me, and it might look okay to a person, without much experience in real estate. The problem is it's got a lot of color contamination in this photograph, and so those tungsten lights or warm incandescent lights, whatever they are, spill a lot of color contamination into the room. And so if we just go now to the second frame, what I've done is I've just opened up this photograph in a hue saturation layer in Photoshop, and you can see I've just taken the yellow slider and moved it to the right for saturation. You can see the amount of yellow contaminating this particular scene. And so a trained eye would see this, and it would make the original photograph look a bit muddy, to a trained eye. The colors don't look as crisp and clean and as neutral as you would like. And so what you typically would have to do is go in to Photoshop. This is why we work with different layers in Photoshop. This is where I basically stripped out the color contamination of the room. So you see it's brighter and cleaner and crisper looking, right? The walls look really white, which is what they are. The fireplace looks white. And then I just left a little bit of hint of warmth on the lampshades, right? In the area under the lamp at the back there to kind of give, a homey flavor or feel to the room. But the room doesn't look like that it's yellow color contamination. So these are the sorts of things, Frederick, that we have to kind of correct so that it looks properly lit, it looks bright and cheerful, but yet it still looks neutral. And as you know, when the colors are neutral, truly neutral, then the real color and the color scheme within the room stands out in a more natural way. And yet it still has this bright and cheerful look that agents are looking for. So these are the sorts of, typical things that, we have to fix when we shoot. And then you can also see at the back there some detail of the backyard, and it's kind of up to the photographer, in terms of how much do you want to pull that. We'll talk about a window pull a little bit, but how much do you want to pull that in? And again, there's different schools of thought, like just enough to show a little detail at the back, to some guys that want to see virtually all of that color and detail, out the window as possible. Even though it doesn't look that way to our eye, they might want to pull that in even more saturated and detailed, in terms of what you can see out the window. Again, these are, just different flavors or personal taste in terms of how much of that you do. Certainly there's not a lot of need if you've got a window next to a fence and it's not very interesting. There's not a big need for doing what we call a window pull, just to show an unsightly fence next to the window. You wouldn't want to show that as one of the best features of the house. So
right, but if it was a view over a prairie or a nice view of a cityscape or something that was remarkable, then you would pay more attention to the view. But if it's something unremarkable, kind of let it de-emphasize, right?
That's exactly right. And so, if you've got a nice, beautiful backyard with landscaping, you'd certainly want to show, more of that. And again, it's kind of up to the client in terms of how much detail they want to see, and also a little bit up to the photographer as well. So this is, this photograph was probably 2 ambient frames and 1 or 2 flash frames, and then
Wow.
just blend it in Photoshop, and then I go into the final composited file, and they just strip out the color contamination, just leave a hint of warmth from the lamps to kind of give a cheerful feeling to the photograph.
And call it good. And call it good. So
Yeah.
what about artificial intelligence? And you spoke a little bit about the sky replacement and that sort of
hmm
thing, which Luminar 4 and ostensibly Luminar AI are
Yeah.
exceedingly good at, amongst other things. How does a real estate photographer use those sorts of artificial intelligence tools in the workflow?
So there's a couple places where I think AI would really benefit those, and certainly the one that's kind of become available to us already is sky replacement. So I'm going to show here. This is a traditional what we call twilight shot. So this was an assignment I had last year at this beautiful kind of mansion up in a exclusive property in Alamo, California, and this is not a sky replacement. That's really the sky, and that's really the house with the lights on. And I came back just at the right time of day to get this photograph, right, and the color in the sky, the windows showing just the right amount of color and luminosity of the windows to make this look appealing to potential clients. But this is a matter of having nice clouds that day, having nice light, being able to show up at the right time, being able to have the windows and the house lit up inside so that you could get some nice glow out of the windows. So this is what would be, traditionally termed as a classic twilight photograph with nothing done to it. That's the way it really was.
Yeah.
And so I got lucky that day. But twilights are often a really nice way to sell a home that may not be moving. And I've done a lot of twilight assignments for my friend Peter Lyons and or real estate agents that just can't move a home for whatever reason, and they will add some twilight photographs in to help sell the home and make it more appealing. So the next one, this photograph is a shot that I did last I think it was last July, just this year, over in Oakland, and it's actually a really nice home that was completely remodeled inside. And again, I was called in to do a twilight, and so I was able to get nice light coming out of the windows. But as you know, Frederick, in the Bay Area, we often have blue skies, not many clouds in the summertime. So this is where I used one of the sky replacement features for Luminar 4, and I was able to select a sky that not only had the right color temperature for the time of day, but also the light coming from the right direction, so that this sky replacement looks natural and what you might expect to see from this scene. And the client liked this so much, the customer liked this so much that they actually led with this photograph in their listing. So these types of twilights can actually pay off in terms of what might be appealing to a potential customer. And this is kind of why there's a demand for these now. And again, it's why I think Luminar 4 in particular has really helped out real estate photographers being able to do these types of sky replacements easily, because it can, this type of photograph can really be appealing for potential customers when they see a photograph like this. So
Love it. Love it. So much to learn with this
mm,
stuff.
yeah.
It's deep. It's like I said, it's like an iceberg, right? It's
Mhm.
deceptively large under the waterline. If you want to kind of bring it up to this level of work, for the people that are watching this and kind of inspired and they want to do this level of work, what's a good path, an educational path? Is it just throw yourself into it, watch some YouTube videos, or do you apprentice
Um,
under someone? Like what do you say?
I would say that there's a lot of good online content. So certainly Kelby One has an introductory course that's pretty good. The guys at Pro EDU, they've got outstanding courses in architectural photography, and also real estate photography. And I learned a lot from those courses in taking those, because like any discipline, Frederick, as you know, when you go into it, you think that it's not going to be as hard as it is. And then you get into it and you have to deliver consistent, high quality work time after time, you know, shot after shot on a given assignment, day after day. And when you have to deliver a high level of consistency day after day, month in and month out, you need to have your chops down and be able to understand, what do I need to produce? Why does the photograph need to look the way that it does? And then how do I use, the tools and capabilities, both in terms of the photographic equipment, the post-production tools, to deliver, consistent work that meets the quality needs of your client.
Love it so much.
So
Very well
can
said.
can I talk about one more example where I think,
Yeah, absolutely.
yes. So this is a scene here of a living room that I shot last year for a client, and what you see out the windows is nice scenery with hills and clouds in the background off to the right, and this is the sort of thing that would be appealing to a customer where you want to show more detail. Right, is you've got this beautiful view out the living room window, and these are what we call window pulls. Basically, it's pulling in the detail outside of the window and showing it in the room. And we use a specific technique for that. I'm going to go to another photograph here, a beautiful mansion that I shot in Oakland last year. You can see out, the backyard, out the main window in the living room there, and also outside the piano, right? And they had a beautiful yard with a pool outside this living room, right? And you want to show, again, the best parts of the room and the room at its best. And so window pulls might be an area where Luminar can explore how to do this more easily for customers, for clients and photographers, because right now what we have to do is we have to take the appropriate frames with either ambient light or flash to light the room properly. But then when we do the window pull, we have to flash the window with a pretty small aperture, somewhere f8 or whatever, and a fairly small shutter speed, short shutter speed, to get the detail out of the window. And then we blend these in darken mode, in the blending mode, as a layer in Photoshop to pull in the detail so that we don't have to mask, as you see here, all the intricate drapes and frames and everything around the window, right? And so this is an area where I could see AI, some of the AI techniques making this a lot easier for us with respect to both architectural and real estate work is this particular area, because again, it's something that makes the photograph more appealing potentially to the customer.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about at the end of the day, right? Is the
Yes.
the customer. You have two customers in this case. You've got the agent, and then you've got the potential home buyer, whom
Exactly.
you have to appeal to both of them and to
That's
get
right.
the job done. Yeah.
Yep.
What's the
Yep.
final mechanism for delivering these files to the agent so that they can list them? Do you just like throw them on Dropbox, or is there something more intricate?
Yeah, normally for real estate, we deliver via Dropbox. For architectural, you might deliver via Dropbox, or you may mail, a disk of the files to somebody. But usually, it's via some sort of file management, a service like Dropbox that we would use. So.
Okay, excellent.
Mhm.
So if people want to connect with you,
Mhm.
Stephen, or someone's watching this and they want to hire you, or just kind of go peruse your work, what's a good location for them to punch into their web browser?
They can find me at stephencharf.com, just www.stephencharf.com, and that will take them to my photography site, Racing the Light, and they can get in touch with me there.
Awesome. All right, sir. Thank you for doing
Sure.
this. This is fantastic. Great interview. This should have been like 5 hours long to kind of dive into everything, but I think you excelled and hit it out of the park. With the goal of whetting people's appetite when it comes to this type of photography, and the appreciation of the effort and the meticulousness that goes into creating these images that we just look at and say, oh, that's a great shot. They take for granted all the work that went in on the back end of it. So kudos to you, man. Congratulations.
Thank you, Frederick. Thanks for arranging this today, too.
No, absolutely. And we'll be in touch. I'll talk to you soon.